Hello everyone, back tuning in to today's second video, doing the GWV Sunday Round Up for today's second video. So it's going to be your usual Sunday eclectic mix of this and that. We're going to look at solar activity, we're going to look at what's happening with the oceans. We'll have a look at the weather for the next week to 10 days as well. Going to be a lot of hot and dry weather to come in the days ahead. Summer 2018, it's already been pretty good, but it's going to step up another 2 or 3 years, I think, in the week ahead. And yeah, it's going to be some very warm and dry weather indeed. We'll also have a look at CFS V2, see if there's any sign of this very prolonged now dry spell breaking down in the rest of the summer. So I'll get on with that for you in a second. Just to say that today's first video was the autumn 2018 analogues update, the second one. This time we're looking at the autumns that follow warm or very warm June. So have a look at that video. It's here on the home page. Just scroll down the page a little bit and it's above the pollen count. There's also going to be a written version later on today when we place that video onto the autumn updates and forecast page. Be a written summary going over everything discussed in the video that goes with that as well. So you can come back and watch the video on demand whenever you want, and also have a read of that written post. But I'll probably get that up on the autumn updates page around 6 or 7 o'clock this evening. So, to kick us all off though, before I get on with that, just to say about the donation. So we have had another donation for GWV. A big thank you to the person who has donated. They want to be remaining anonymous, which is absolutely fine. So I'm not going to give them a shout out, but I will say if they're watching, they'll know who they are. So I'll say a big thank you to that person for again becoming a donor for GWV. If you would like to make a donation to GWV, you can do it in 2 ways. We've got the paypal.me page for GWV just here. So again, the links to this page and also our Patreon page will be left in the description box at YouTube, and also linking to all these pages on all of the pages at GWV. So this is the GWV's PayPal page, so you can donate whatever you want as a one-off donation via PayPal. Alternatively, you can become a patron for GWV, and that's a monthly donation, although of course you can cancel that at any point, but it's a monthly donation, and as little as $1 a month will allow you to become a patron for GWV. It's helping to pay for our website. So again, a big thank you to all of the donors and all of the patrons for GWV. It really is very special what you're doing for the website, so a big thank you to all of you for your donations and also for becoming patrons for GWV. We will give you a shout out in the video, say thank you. If you want one, if you'd rather just remain anonymous, then that is perfectly fine as well. And it's just what you want to do. So big thank you to everybody for their donations and also for becoming patrons for GWV. Right, we'll get on with today's Sunday Roundup then. We're going to start off looking at solar activity. So this is how the solar disk on our side of the disk today is looking from solarhound.net. So we've got 2 sunspot regions, one just there and one right over here, just coming onto that side of the solar disk. So despite those 2 sunspot regions, however, solar activity is at very low levels and expected to remain at very low levels for the next 3 days. This is GWV's Sunday Roundup Solar Activity Tracker. So this is been sent through by our friend James Ackfield this morning. Big thanks to James sending this through. So I've had a little bit of a spike in sunspots over the past couple of weeks. We can see the orange line here is showing each day's sort of sunspot numbers. So you can see what's happening at the end here. We've had rather a large lift up in sunspots. We did a few days ago, which actually took us to the highest level of sunspot numbers since this really big spike that happened back in September, start of September last year. So we've had more solar activity in the past, more sunspots in the past week or so than at any point since September 2017. However, that's not going to be sustained for very long because we are moving remorselessly into solar minimum. So we already see that those sunspot numbers are starting to fall back once again. However, it has been enough to lift up the trend lines. If trend lines are the thick green and the thick red lines, and they've moved upwards with this push up in sunspot numbers that we've had over the past week or so. Now, perhaps just the first signs that they're beginning to level off those trend lines as the sunspot numbers are starting to drop back again. Although this looks like quite a large lift up, it is still a relatively modest level of sunspot. But it just tells us that we haven't yet reached true solar minimum. Back around here, back around sort of March, April, when we was at this very, very low level of solar activity, indeed, there was quite a bit of speculation that we probably reached solar minimum for solar cycle number 24. But it always looked a bit dubious, it always looked a bit early. And I think definitely we have got a little way to go yet before we reach the true solar minimum of solar cycle 24, and that's likely to occur. I would have thought that will occur sometime next year, actually, probably early to middle part of 2019, but still a little way to go yet before we reach that true solar minimum level. When we do reach it, we'll be at this sort of level of solar activity over quite a sustained period, over several weeks or maybe even months too. So just still a little bit short of the true solar minimum of solar cycle 24. We'll keep you updated with the GWV Sunday Round Up solar activity tracker, of course, over the next few weeks. This how sea surface temperature anomalies are looking in the oceans, or were looking last week. We did last week's Sunday Roundup. So we've got 3 specific areas of interest. We've got the Pacific Ocean over here, and particularly the equatorial Pacific Ocean. That's the ENSO region, of course. And we've got the northern part of the Pacific Ocean up there. And then we've got the Atlantic Ocean, or the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean over there. So that's how things were looking with the ocean sea surface temperature anomalies last week. This is the very latest, and we can see that. So let's deal with ENSO first of all. We did the ENSO update yesterday, released that for June. We can see that we are beginning to warm up a little bit now through this equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. Just some slightly warmer than average sea surface temperature anomalies beginning to appear here over towards the eastern part of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Possibly the first indication of an El Nino event. We covered this in last night's ENSO update. The modelling at the moment is wanting to go into a weak to borderline moderate El Nino through the second half of this year. There's quite a lot of warmer than average subsurface temperature anomalies underneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean as well. And the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index, is increasingly moving into negative territory, and that's telling us that the atmosphere is starting to reflect an El Nino type state, which, if it continues, will allow that warm water to be pushed up that's currently under the surface of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. So it looks like we're probably going to go into a weak El Nino in the second half of this year. One of the things that I'm a bit dubious about, though, is these colder than average sea surface temperature anomalies that are just here. So sort of particularly off the coast of Chile, which is that area just there. When you've got colder than average sea surface temperature anomalies in that area, it's not one of the things that you tend to associate with El Nino. So it is very likely now, based on the modelling anyway, that we're going to go into a weak El Nino. But we was at this situation this time last year, early summer last year. We was expecting to go into an El Nino. Actually, what happened is that the whole thing collapsed, and we finished up very late on last year going into a La Nina, into a cold event. So these models are maybe a little bit biased in trying to produce El Ninos. I'm not sure about that, but obviously we'll keep you updated. It does look as though we're likely to have a weak El Nino in place by the autumn, but we'll just have to keep an eye on it. Whether that does actually materialise, we'll wait and see. Further north, in the northern part of the Pacific Ocean, it's generally quite a coolish scene actually now in the far northern part of the Pacific Ocean, but otherwise quite warm to the south of that. Now, over in the Atlantic, we've got this, still got this very unusual situation going on. We've got these very much colder than average sea surface temperature anomalies to the south of Greenland, and also going down into the tropical part of the Atlantic Ocean as well. That's likely to dampen down this year's hurricane season, particularly if we get an El Nino starting to develop through the second half of the summer. In between, though, we've got this very warm area just here, in between those two sort of colder areas. We've got quite a warm area just there through the central part of the northern Atlantic. So it is a very unusual sea surface temperature anomaly profile that we've got going on at the moment. If we compare to last week, you'll see that those colder than average sea surface temperature anomalies are getting ever closer to the UK. So that's how things were looking to the west of the UK and Ireland last week. This is the latest, and you'll see that those cold and average sea surface temperature anomalies have moved closer to us. Now, this is probably helping to promote the high pressure that we've currently got close to the UK at the moment. But what I would say about this is, with cold and average sea surface temperature anomalies just to the west of us, if we start to pull in more of a westerly flow, actually we might start to see the temperature cooling down. Just depends where the wind direction is coming from. If the wind direction continues to be coming from the south or the southeast, and obviously we're going to be bringing up lots of hot air from southern Europe. If the high pressure was to reposition itself and for it to become centred to our west or southwest, then we would turn the winds into a westerly direction. And because the Atlantic is colder than average, or the sea surface temperature anomalies of the Atlantic are colder than average just to our west, then that would have a dampening effect on the temperature. Now, if this continues into the winter, that's not the case at all, because even if the sea surface temperature anomalies are colder than average in the winter, if you've got westerly winds, it won't matter. They'll still be very much warmer than an easterly wind in the winter, even if the Atlantic is very cold. Or usually, westerly winds will be warmer in winter than southerly or easterly winds. But in summer, it's a little bit different. So if we do turn the wind into the west, because the sea surface temperature anomalies are now quite cold, just to the west of us, then that would dampen down the temperature. So that's just something to bear in mind, that particularly for the second half of the summer, perhaps, that we might not sustain this really warm, hot weather that we've had just recently. It's all very speculative, of course. If we keep the high pressure blocking out over into the east of the country, it will remain very warm, whatever those sea surface temperature anomalies are doing in the Atlantic. So this is how the GFS ensembles are looking for the next couple of weeks. Looking at Northampton today, very close to me. The red line here is the 30-year upper air temperature average for Northampton. The temperatures are on their way up. They're going to peak sometime in the middle or second half of the week at 15 Celsius at 850 HPA, which will be enough to lift the temperature to 30 degrees. That's around 86 Fahrenheit. So it is going to be a hot week coming up. Then after that, a very slow and gradual decline in the temperature. Certainly not a dramatic decline, but a gradual cooling down. So as we go through this first week of July, we find the temperatures are returning close to average. Bear in mind there's a lot of scatter in that period, so there are several ensemble members that are keeping things quite hot. Several that are actually going quite cool, though, through that first week of July. So that's perhaps a little bit up for grabs now, the first week of July, whether we're going to sustain these very warm or hot conditions or not. Far as precipitation is concerned, so it's just completely dry actually over the over next week. So to the start of July, no rainfall whatsoever coming up in Northampton or anywhere really across England and Wales. Through the first week of July, we have got some precipitation spikes, not many of them. So I think a lot of dry weather continuing, especially in the south through the first week of July. Maybe just hints of things going a bit wetter into the second week of July, because that's a really long way off. We only just get to the second week of July in this ensemble chart, which is just there. So it's a really long way off. It's very, very unreliable. And I think we can say that within the next week to 10 days, we are looking at more exceptionally dry weather. The dry spell, the prolonged dry spell, will continue. Surface temperature ensembles for Northampton look like that, so warm at the moment and becoming warmer in the days ahead. These undercut the temperatures a little bit as well, so you can imagine that just here we probably are going close to 30 degrees if we add on 2 or 3 more degrees. And then through the first week of July, perhaps just signs of a little bit of a decline in the temperature, although still staying pretty warm, still staying above 10 degrees Celsius pretty much throughout. And nights looking quite warm generally as well. That's 10 degrees Celsius. Most ensemble members are keeping nights minimum temperatures, if you like, at or above 10 degrees Celsius, which is relatively warm minimum temperature. So the warm and dry spell certainly set to continue for an extended period. Temperature anomalies for the week ahead, going from the 24th of June to the 2nd of July, are coming out warmer than average for the UK and Ireland. Most parts of Western Europe are coming out warmer than average. You'll notice that it's in the southeast of Europe that the temperature anomalies are cooler than average. So the southeast of Europe is quite cool, the north and west of Europe is quite warm. That's something that you tend to get quite a lot across Europe. If the southeastern part of Europe is doing one thing, the northwest will tend to be doing the opposite, which is one of the ways that the weather tends to balance itself out. And look at that precipitation anomaly from the 24th of June to the 2nd of July. Really, really dry precipitation anomalies for the UK and Ireland and the France as well. So a very, very dry week ahead coming up. Notice it is quite wet though down in the southeast. This is kind of like going down to Greece. This area just here, and that's looking substantially wetter than average. So if you know anyone that's off on holiday to Greece, well, obviously it's going to be warm because it's the middle of summer, but they're better prepared perhaps for some big thunderstorms and some very lively weather as well. But the prolonged dry spell is set to continue, certainly in the next week for the UK and for Ireland. Quickly looking at America, it's a relatively warm scene through most parts of the United States as well, so it's warm on both sides of the Atlantic at the moment. Just this far northwestern corner, the Pacific Northwest, if you like, is a little bit cooler up there, but generally most parts of the states are warmer than average in the week ahead. Precipitation very dry in the southwestern part of the United States. Of course, it's always dry down there at this time of year. California, Nevada will always be very, very dry in the middle of summer. But that's drier than average, of course, because these are anomalies to normal. So significantly dry in the west and southwest. Up in the north, northern and central parts of states, it's a little bit wetter up there. So coming back to home then, and this is how the GFS is looking for Wednesday. High pressure is centred over the top of the UK. So this is what I was talking about with the sea surface temperature anomalies. So we know that we've got cooler than average sea surface temperature anomalies now just to the west of Ireland. So in that area, the sea surface temperature anomalies are quite cool. If the wind goes westerly, then it's going to bring those cooler than average. The temperature will be running, or the wind will be running over those cooler than average sea surface temperature anomalies. So a westerly will bring those cool temperatures to our shores. However, it doesn't matter what the sea surface temperature anomalies are doing if the high pressure is centred here, because there's no westerly wind. The westerly winds are actually going off up there. So in this situation, it doesn't matter. We're just bringing up these very warm or hot southerly to southeasterly winds with the air drifting up from southern Europe. So obviously that's dry and hot conditions, even with those cooler than average sea surface temperature anomalies just to the west of Ireland. Then we go through to Thursday and Friday. No real change. High pressure remains dominant. So stays very warm, maybe hot up to the end of the week, and prolonged dry conditions as well. These conditions continue into the weekend. You'll notice by Sunday we're trying to just bring a little bit more of a westerly wind into Scotland. So that's trying to turn things a bit cooler and a little bit more unsettled across Scotland. But essentially we still remain under this ridge, so we continue to have a lot of very warm and dry weather throughout next weekend on this GFS run. Into the extended range, which takes us to day 10, we find that very subtly and gradually the high pressure is just beginning to slip a little bit to the southwest, which is starting to try and allow a very weak and disorganised westerly flow to start to re-establish. So that will start to cool things down, especially for the northern part of the country. I would think still pretty warm down in the south up to day 10, which is Wednesday the 4th of June. We saw it on the ensemble that through this first week of July, the temperature is just slowly declining a little bit. So that will start to bring cooler air into the north, to the south still, even up to day 10. Quite warm. Beyond that, we go to the extended range of the GFS. It gradually starts to turn a little bit more unsettled, although still with the high pressure influence really, but its position is to the west of the country then. So by this point we would be starting to pull down those winds from the west-northwesterly direction, and with the cooler than average sea surface temperature anomalies just to our west, we'll probably start to bring cooler air down across the country through the second half of the first week of July and into the second week of July. That's quite speculative because it's in the extended time frame. Not particularly unsettled though, because we've still got high pressure very, very close to us. This is how the ECMWF is looking, and again we've got the high pressure centred over just to the east of us on Wednesday. That continues through Thursday, through Friday, into next weekend. Loads of high pressure influences continuing. So prolonged dry, warm to hot weather will go on to next weekend at the very least. Into the extended range, we keep this ridge centering very close to the country, so that remains really warm and mainly dry. In fact, up to day 10, there's no real change. The high pressure of the ridge continuing there very, very close to the country. So I suspect the ECMWF has 10 days of pretty much dry weather through most parts of the country. The Atlantic is trying to get back in with the jet stream, but essentially the jet is still going off up there, so we remain very warm and particularly very dry up to day 10 with the ECMWF. This is the 10-day maximum temperature accumulated chart from the Weather Outlook based on the GFS run I've just shown you. So this is how maximum temperatures are going to be stacking up on average over the next 10 days. It's going to be a very warm to hot period indeed, with temperatures widely across the UK and much of Ireland as well into the mid to upper 20s Celsius. Bear in mind that's an accumulated maximum temperature chart, so some days could be hotter than that, and it is certainly possible some places will be going up to 30 degrees at times through the course of this week. That's 86 in Fahrenheit. Going to be a very warm week indeed. Perhaps more strikingly though is the 10-day accumulated precipitation chart from the Weather Outlook. Remember, you can find a link to Weather Outlook on the links page, because virtually all parts of the country over the next 10 days have no rainfall whatsoever, or very, very minimal level of rainfall. So just 1, 2, 3, 4 millimetres across most parts of the country. Some places coming away with 0 millimetres, you'll notice. Those areas, the GFS model is not forecasting any rain whatsoever in the next 10 days. You can see it in the far north of Scotland, where we're closer to the jet stream going up there, of course. In the far north of Scotland, we have got some precipitation being forecast there, up to around 10 millimetres, which is quite a small amount of rainfall really for the north of Scotland, so even there it's very dry really, but some precipitation in the far north of Scotland, but essentially most parts of the country look exceptionally dry in the coming 10 days. How long could this go on for? Let's finally finish up having a look at the CFS V2. So this is the 700 millibar height anomaly from the CFS for July, and it's placed in an area of above average heights very close to the country, so a little bit to the northwest, but That will continue. A lot of dry weather, I think, through the course of July. The jet stream will be going up there on the northern side of that ridge. Pressure is forecast to be a little bit weaker to our south, so maybe chance of some thundery showers or something happening in the south. But essentially, the Atlantic is blocked off. The jet stream is pushed off to the north of the country, so you'd expect a lot of dry weather to be occurring with that 700 millibar height anomaly for July. So July could be another pretty dry month. But August does look different, has been consistently signalled to be different. This is the 700 millibar height anomaly for August, where we have this area of above average heights going much further north. So it's going up towards Iceland, Svalbard, to the north of Scandinavia up there. We've got this area of below average heights down to our southwest. That looks potentially we're bringing in very warm easterly winds, so it could continue to be very warm in August, but with the below average heights and low pressure to our south, that could provide instability for thunderstorms. So that could be a little bit explosive in August, potentially a very interesting month in August. We had a complete dearth, of course, of convective activity over the past few weeks. Been very little in the way of thunderstorms. Maybe things will liven up from a convective point of view in August. And then I'll just run into September. So September actually looks unsettled. We take the above average heights and keep them up to the far northeast of the country. So again, hints of northern blocking. But we get this area below average heights over UK and much of central Europe. So September forecast to be an unsettled, probably quite cool month actually. We will be on the cool side of the jet stream. There, I think, in September, with the jet doing something a little bit like that. That's 3 months away, though, so it's a really long way off. But the signals are still there, kind of like what we've talked about in the summer forecast, which is that very slowly and gradually the summer turns more unsettled. Remember, we are expecting a warm summer. I think the temperatures will continue to be quite hot even into August, but very gradually the pattern turns more unsettled and potentially turns thundery as well. That's kind of like what the CFS is hinting at. So by the time we get through to September, it turns genuinely quite unsettled and cool by the start of the autumn. And then finally, I'll just finish. I shouldn't really be showing you this because it's too far away, but I'll just finish off with the 700 millibar height anomaly for the winter. This is for winter 2018-19. And it looks quite interesting, actually. We've got below average heights to our east. The trough is centred over Scandinavia and Northern Europe. Above average heights through the middle of the Atlantic. And the flow will be doing something like that. So on the cold side of the jet there with the winter, and probably pulling down quite a lot of cold northerly or northeasterly winds. So after what is potentially quite a hot summer, we potentially go into a pretty cold pattern, maybe quite wintry pattern even, in the winter. But that's a very, very, very long way off, of course. The CFS will have many twists, turns, and chopping and changing before we get to the winter. So I shouldn't really have included that, but I thought as we were looking at the CFS V2, why not throw it in at the end of the video? Because next week there is no autumn analogues, and there will be no Sunday Roundup either. They're both cancelled. I'm clearing the decks next Sunday for the winter NAO forecast. So that's something we do around the start of July every year. We try to project, based on the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic in the month of May, we try to project what we think the NAO is likely to be doing through the winter. So it's always a very, very important update. It always gets a lot of interest. I'm sure many of you will be interested to see the NAO forecast for winter of 2018-19 next week. And because of that, no Sunday Roundup next week, no autumn analogues. They'll both be back the following week. So that's all for now. Don't forget to check out that second autumn analogues update. And that's all for now. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.